I always say, do you know your players as well as your plays? Coaches, we'll go to clinics and we'll X and O. Every play works on the board. The board's undefeated. Right? But why doesn't it always work with people? Because people are people.
Welcome to the Cutting Edge Coaching Podcast, where we believe coaches are some of the most important teachers and leaders in the world, and they deserve to be supported. I'm your host, Luke Gromer, and every week we're bringing you conversations with coaches, experts, and leaders from across sports that will give you practical ideas and strategies that you can apply in your coaching to develop high-performing teams and high-character people. Coaches, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Hal Wilson to the podcast. Dr. Wilson is passionate about helping people turn potential into production. He is currently a Georgia Southern University Associate Professor of Coaching Education, coordinator of the Coaching Education Minor and Fully Online Master's Program, director of the Coaching Education Laboratory, a member of the Coach Development Team of Sport Coach America, and affiliate faculty of the Center for Rehabilitation and Independent Living, focusing on adaptive sports for wounded veterans. Georgia Southern's Coaching Education Program has received numerous awards and recognitions, such as being named a National Youth Sports Champion by the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion in 2023, and was the only university in the nation to be named a Project Play Champion by the Aspen Institute in 2019. Wilson has spoken around the world on coaching and leadership and has been invited to present by organizations like USA Basketball and the U.S. Soccer Foundation. Dr. Wilson has 27 years of coaching experience from youth to the NCAA Division I Power 5 level in a number of sports, including basketball, flag football, soccer, and softball. He was a varsity head basketball coach for 11 years, taking 3 teams to the state playoffs, 2 of which were the first appearance in school history, and setting a school record for wins at 2 of them. At the college level, he was part of an SEC championship at Tennessee and a CAA championship at UNCW. He has earned several Coach of the Year awards, but counts his relationships with his players and staff, such as being asked to officiate a player's wedding last fall, or 6 assistants getting head coaching jobs, as his greatest reward and accomplishment. Over 50 of Wilson's former players have gone on to compete in college, and some of those have even reached the NBA, NFL, and MLB. Wilson is a certified adaptive sports coach and also participated in the Coach Developer Academy of the International Council for Coaching Excellence and the United States Center for Coaching Excellence. He believes in the positive potential of coaches as leaders and seeks to encourage, develop, and empower leaders to positively impact others through holistic, person-centered leadership. In part 1 of this 2-part conversation, we dive into legacy leadership and the 3 M's of coaching. As always, if you'd like a copy of the free podcast notes, go to cuttingedgecoach.com/podcast or click the link in the show details to download a free PDF of notes from this episode or any episode of the podcast. Now to part 1 of my conversation with Dr. Hal Wilson. Enjoy the episode. Coach is really excited to have Dr. Hal Wilson on the podcast with me today. Dr. Wilson, thanks for taking the time to join me.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, Dr. Wilson, I would love it if you could start off the conversation and just give the listeners a sense of who you are and what your coaching journey has been and what you currently do in the coaching world.
Sure. Well, I'm just a guy that loves sports and what it's done for me and try and give back. I've coached for 27 years, from 4-year-olds to 24-year-olds, from youth to major college, Division I, everything in between, public, private, small schools, big schools, beach, inner city, mountains, rural. So a little bit of everything. And I transitioned into higher education 9 years ago. I went back, 11 years ago, I went back and got my PhD. I've been at Georgia Southern for 9 years now. We have one of the best online master's degrees for coaches in the world. We have students from over 30 states and countries. And that's my passion now, is investing in the next generation of coaches. So that's why I'm so excited to be here with you, because you give so much to the coaching community.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm grateful that some coaches have listened and found it valuable. That's been the goal from the start, is hopefully I can learn a lot and it can help coaches help their athletes, most importantly. That's what it's really about. Before we get into some of the topics we're going to cover,
Will you just, because I'm curious, will you tell us some of the classes that you teach at Georgia Southern?
Sure. Well, we were the second university in the nation to be nationally accredited for coaching education in our minor and masters, which means outside experts have vetted the program. So we align with the national standards for sport coaches. If you're not familiar with those, there's 43 standards. I had never heard of them the first 18 years I coached. It wasn't until I went back to get my doctorate. If you do know about them, you can be a better coach faster. And so all of our classes are aligned with that. We prepare you for the CSCS if you want that in strength conditioning. We cover everything from administration to social cultural background to practice design to movement analysis and everything in between. And because we have people from every sport, every level. We have pro coaches, college, high school, middle school, strength and conditioning, tactical with the military, equestrian, martial arts. I mean, you name a sport, it's been in our program. And they learn as much from each other as they do from us because they go through as a cohort. You take the same classes together with the same group.
That's awesome. Yeah, I that's one of the things that's been cool for me in this journey is talking to coaches from different sports and yeah, being able to take ideas from them and learn from them. It's really cool. Well, let's dive into some of these topics, and at the end, we can come back around and learn a little bit more about your guys' programs at Georgia Southern. One of the topics I know that you're passionate about is legacy leadership and coaching. Could you define that term for us, and then let's dive into what it means and how to do that in our coaching?
Sure. So leadership's a word that's thrown around a lot. There's 1,000 different definitions, and there's a lot of different theories. So I feel like I try and straddle both areas because some of the criticisms of higher ed is you feel like, well, they're really removed. They don't know what it's like to actually be coaching. And then some people in higher ed feel like, well, the coaches, I wish they would see these theories, how it could help them be better. And so I'm actually still coaching now. I coach my daughters, and so I kind of see both sides of it. So back when I was a high school varsity coach, well, I'd always been interested in leadership, but I started researching servant leadership and Robert Greenleaf that came up with the term and all the different transformational leadership and all the different styles. And then I came across what was called legacy leadership when I was getting my doctorate. And it's not been used a whole lot, but it just really struck a chord with me. And so basically, what it is, in my mind, it's an extension of servant leadership and transformational leadership because there's an intentional focus on leadership reproduction for selfless, positive growth. Um, and so, a legacy leader, so I can be a servant leader and really care about my players and really want them to do well, but kind of stops there, right? We both want to meet our goals. I help them come meet the team goals through their individual goals, but through a legacy leader, we perpetuate that cycle of positive leadership. And so, for example, how many times have you heard a coach say, we didn't have any leaders this year? Nobody stepped up. The eighth graders didn't step up. The seniors didn't step up. The transfer, whatever. And my question always to coach is, how much time have you spent intentionally building leadership? Oh, well, I don't have time for that. Well, then don't complain about it. Right. So you need to have a system to perpetuate the culture, if you want to use that buzzword, or the family, if you want to use that word, whatever you're about. How's that going to be perpetuated when you're not in the gym, when you're not in the locker room, when you're not on the bus? What's being said, what's being done? So a legacy leader has an intentional plan, not for themselves, for the good of the people in that. Yes, to help us meet our team goals, but then there's a cycle. Like, for example, when I was a varsity head coach, I started a system where I would have my 12th graders would mentor my 10th graders, my 10th graders mentor my 8th graders, 11th, ninth, 7th. So now you're connecting your high school and your middle school. You're trying to reduce hazing, reduce bullying, build connections. When somebody gets to the high school, I've got somebody I already know, I already have a relationship that's going to look out for me. They're not going to pick on me because I'm the freshman. That's my guy or that's my girl. We already have a relationship. And it also eliminates the excuse of, well, I don't know what to do. I mean, I had a girl, she was the best player in the state. I've coached boys and girls. I was coaching varsity girls, the best player in the state. It was unbelievable. She averaged about 24 a game, could have averaged 44 a game, was very unselfish. And she literally says, I don't know what to do because we've been so good. There have been standout players where she just sat back. Well, now she's the best player in the state. She's the leader on the team, and she doesn't know what to do. So that's a problem. That's a problem created by coaches. Instead of complaining about kids today won't do this or that, what's your system? What's your plan to create a legacy of leadership? So when that state player of the year or just that good kid graduates, what's going to happen next? So that's kind of it in a really big nutshell.
Yeah, I mean, I think some thought-provoking questions there of, yeah, we complain about a lack of leadership, but do we actually spend any time trying to build it? Yeah, that's one of the things I was personally challenged with this last season with one of my teams is the 2 best players on the team, they're twins, and I would describe them as emotionally fragile, right? The grit, resilience muscles are underdeveloped in them, and when that's your best players, like, you better be intentional about trying to develop them and other people into leaders, or it's gonna be a mess. So, like, I mean, I had to take time away from the court, and we had to sit in the classroom, and we had to watch film clips from coaches and athletes, and we had to have discussions, and we had to watch film clips of ourselves in the game, and we had to do some really intentional things to try to make help them grow in that area. Um, and it wasn't perfect, and it was sometimes kind of a slow and painful process. But by the end of the season, like, man, there was growth, and it wasn't perfect. It's still not perfect. There's still they can be really difficult to coach, but they have grown a lot, and not just them, but other athletes on the team as well. Will
Mhm.
you talk more about how to actually implement a system that reproduces leaders? Maybe you can share what you did when you were a coach or what you've seen coaches do successfully. I think that's, again, something that a lot of coaches, we want to have a system for this, but where do I start? What does it actually mean? Do I have time for it? Do I have, all these objections that often come up when we talk about you got to have a system for developing leaders. Could you try to simplify it for us or give us some examples of it?
Right. And I think you hit on kind of a larger point is you could spend your entire practice every day on schoolwork and it wouldn't be enough. You could spend your entire practice every day on team play and it wouldn't be enough. You could spend your entire practice every day on strength and condition. Like, so we have to define, we have to make time, right? And so you have to create a system within that that's simple enough to be effective because it doesn't matter your X's and O's if you haven't connected with your players and if you don't have a system, it's self-perpetuating. So the most important thing is call them the three M's. First M is motive. Motive. What is your motive as a coach? Is it because you're trying to get wins, you're trying to climb the ladder, you're trying to get to the next big school? Do you have a pure motive that's authentic and sincere? Because everybody can see if you're inauthentic, if you're just using them, if they're just a slab of meat out there, if they're just a, PlayStation, hit the X button and they'll do what I say. Um, are you follower centered, not self centered? Again, similarity to servant leadership. Do you know why they're playing? Do you know why they're down today? Do you know them? I always say, do you know your players as well as your plays? Coaches, we'll go to clinics and we'll X and O today. Every play works on the board. The board's undefeated. Right? But why doesn't it always work with people? Because people are people. And some people are motivated, some people are focused, some people are not. So uh, knowing that they care about you or you care about them, and it goes both ways, is so important. And that you're affectionate and emotional within your personality, especially today where kids have less and less personal contact. If you have personal interactions in my coaching classes, so I teach undergrads and grads. So in our undergrads, like I teach a class called coaching basketball. And we go through and we talk about, and when they have to coach their peers in the class, every player every day has to have individual interaction with you. Every player every day. And we go through class. And if they didn't, then you failed as a coach. Then don't complain when they're not bought in. Don't complain when they're, and it can't be fake. It doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be, hey, come to my office and talk to me behind my big desk. How can I find informal times between drills while they're doing the warm up, while they're stretching, before to connect with every kid every day in an affectionate and emotional way so they know that you care about them beyond the court. So that's the first part, your motive. You got to check yourself because it's easy for all of us, because we're all competitors. We probably wouldn't be doing this, right? We want to win and everybody has dreams, but like the Frosty West Dream book, make the big time where you are. You can make a big time difference. For example, Chris Webber, Fab Five member, Hall of Famer, announcer now. I saw him speak at a conference a couple of years ago, and they asked him what coach made the biggest difference in his life. Now, he's played for a lot of really good coaches, a lot of really famous coaches. And he says, without hesitation, my middle school coach. And he said, my middle school coach probably knew less about basketball than any of the coaches that I had, but he cared about me. I knew he cared about me, right? And that made all the difference. So sometimes we get so caught up on level or this or that, it's just, can you make a difference for this kid this year? And do that every day, and you've got something. So there's two other M's I can give them, or do you want to stop
Yeah,
there?
yeah, yeah. Please, please, let's go through the other two M's. This is great stuff.
So the other one is methods, and I really like how this one is phrased. And this is not from me. This is I'll go ahead and get the Whittington, Pitts, Kegler, and Godwin, or Goodwin rather, from 2005 are the ones that came up with this theory, right? And so they say, are you worthy of imitation? Are you worthy of imitation? The question I ask is, especially when I speak to older coaches that are already out in the field, would you want your kids or grandkids to be coached the way you coach your players? Are you worthy of imitation? Because we all coach the way we were coached until we learned differently. We might have had a great coach who did everything right and was positive, or we might not have. Right? So we have to look outside our own experience and find, are we worthy of imitation? This is a big one because the best definition of leadership I've ever seen, the shortest, simplest one, is John Maxwell's. Leadership is influence. So in legacy leadership, they say, can you use influence without exerting authority? Now think about that for a second. Can you influence without exerting authority? Now I'm the head coach. You're going to do what I say or you're going to run. Do what I say, you're not going to play. You're using your authority. You're using your power from your position. So how can you influence them in a way without exerting authority? Well, that's through relationships. Right? Like the old saying, rigor without relationships equals rebellion, or rules without relationships equals rebellion. You've got to make the time to create those relationships. Uh, the next thing is that you're vulnerable and transparent. Age appropriate, you want to be appropriate, but you're a human being as well. Right? Same thing I tell my students, like my college students. I always ask them, what's one thing you wish college professors knew? And this is in one of my coaching classes, and the overwhelming number one answer is, we're so busy, we're so stressed, life is so hard. Well, that's how they perceive it, so it is hard for them. So we got to talk about coping skills. Now, those of us that are beyond college know college is a pretty good time of life, right? But then I tell them, hey, you know what? My life's pretty stressful too. I'm a father of 3 kids, 11 and under. They say, this is not my only class. I've got homework in other classes. Well, guess what? This is not the only class I teach. So I'm a human being. You're a human being. We all have other responsibilities. How can we get the most out of this class that benefits you? Why are you taking this class? It's the same thing with the team, right? So being vulnerable and transparent in an appropriate way. And that goes back to, and I've seen you've had speakers on here talk about this before, but the one thing when you talk about how does theory apply to practice is when I went into higher ed, a self-determination theory. And applying that into coaching, I think, is huge. And I think that goes into these. And self-determination theory, in simple terms, is competence. Are you making them better? Connection. Are you connecting with the team? And then choice. Are you giving them choice? And when I talk to older coaches or higher level coaches, Division I coaches, that's the one they always want to fight you on because they want the old school, my way or the highway. Well, I can't give them choice. I'm running the show because they don't really understand what that means. But I know you've had previous speakers talk about that, so I won't belabor that. But so your motive, your methods, and then your measures. And this is the one, so going to the other direction, this is the one the higher ed people flip out on. It's hard to measure. It's hard to measure because what they say is changed lives. How do you measure a changed life? We complain about kids want instant gratification. Well, do you want instant gratification as a coach? Well, I've worked so hard from this year and they didn't turn it around all of a sudden. Well, maybe they will, and they'll be like Chris Webber in 10, 15, 20 years, saying it was that middle school coach or that junior high or whatever level, or that rec league coach. So you have to plant those seeds and don't dig them up to see if they've grown. You have to plant the seeds, water them, create an environment that's going to be positive for them. And I'll give you one example because listen, I did a lot of things wrong as a coach, a lot. I was a varsity head coach for 11 years, did a lot of things wrong. But every once in a while I do something right. And here's one example I knew I got it right. I coached a kid 13 years after I coached him in high school after he graduated. We'd stayed in contact. He calls, he sounds nervous, and he says, Coach, I just want to let you know I'm getting married. I said, oh, it's fantastic. Great news. There's nothing better as a coach than getting to go to a wedding or a baptism or meet a child. And he said, and then he says, yeah, and I was just wondering, would you be willing to do the ceremony? I'm like, wow, right? I'm not a pastor, So I had to get one of those certifications where I could do it legally. But still, the fact that a kid I coached 13 years ago would ask me to be involved in the most special day with his new family to that point, to me, that's an example of legacy leadership. And when he tells me the things he's learned from playing that he applies in his job now, which is not in sports, then that's a positive thing. Um, and I can give some other examples, but I'll stop there.
No, that's really good. That's really so many good things there. I love those 3 M's: motive, methods, and measures. Yeah, as you were talking about under methods, being vulnerable and transparent in an appropriate way. Yeah, one of the things that was triggered in my mind, and I think I've shared this story before, but it was last summer. It was my first practice with a new team, a new job I had taken, and um, we huddled up for this first practice, introduced myself, try to learn their names, and then I asked them to talk about a couple questions. I asked them to talk about one question. I just said, "What do you need from me as your coach to be successful this year?" And they talked about it and they shared. And one of the things they said was like, "Be a real human." Essentially, it was in their words like, "We want you to be a real person with us." And that was just triggered in my mind as you were talking about that. Yeah, it's so important that in an appropriate way, we're vulnerable and transparent. Like, hey, I don't know the answer. Hey, I screwed this up. Like, my bad. One of my favorite things to be able to do is to get to apologize to a kid. Like when I've genuinely messed up, because I know that almost every time the relationship's actually going to be stronger. And this young person may never have seen an adult model an apology in their life, for all I know, right? Like that's just they may never have experienced that, or we're working on something in practice, and I try to teach it, explain it. We go, it's terrible, and I pause and okay, my bad. This must have been a terrible job by me. Like maybe it was, maybe maybe a couple of them weren't listening closely, right? But just that being willing to be vulnerable, be real, and then own things, right? I think it just goes such a long way with what you were talking about with trust and those relationships and being able to influence, like you said, can we influence without exerting authority, which is really which is really hard sometimes because it feels in the moment like it would be way easier to exert my authority here than to try to influence in another way through those relationships.
And,
Yeah,
and just to be clear, that doesn't mean you should never exert your authority. I
for
mean, there's a
sure.
reason you're in charge. Somebody has to be in charge, but
Yes.
that shouldn't be your 100% of the time go-to method.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Any other thoughts you'd share around or maybe some examples from your coaching when it came to the leadership development that you did with your team or in your program? You shared that one example of having mentors, older students with younger students. I think it's a great, really practical idea, right? How can you create connections between grade levels? Like you said, it's going to reduce some of the issues you have. It's going to make kids feel connected, probably going to increase your retention, right? Because they feel connected, they feel a part of this team. How cool is it, for an 8th grader to have a senior or a junior spending time with them? I mean, like what could be cooler for a young a young athlete than getting something like that? Are there other things you did that were really successful or you felt like built that legacy leadership that you were going for?
I think you just have to have an intentional plan. I don't think there's any secrets, but just finding ways. Um, we would do book studies, we would do community service, we would do, off season have draft teams for. Um, we had a 10,000 make challenge in the off season. So, how many makes can your team get? So now it's not like because again, being vulnerable and transparent, like I was a walk on, I was an uninvited, non preferred walk on. Are you still here? But I got cut as a 7th grader, 8th grader, 9th grader. Finally made the team. Ended up making a Division 1 roster. Right. So I told them I'm never going to give up on anybody, but you've got to do the work. You've got to work hard. But one thing when I was trying to walk on is like nobody, unless there's just an extreme situation, very few people are going to say, man, we really need some more walk-ons or some really average walk. So what are you going to do? You've got to be a good teammate. And I would work really, really hard. I'm first person in the gym, last person to leave because I had to. Right. But the biggest mistake I made was I didn't take somebody with me when I went to work out early or late. Right? And it wasn't because I was being selfish in my mind. It's like I'm just a walk on. But every player is valuable. And so, how can you work hard and make that be contagious? Influence. Because going back to that influence thing, I heard there's some guys, former military, that do a lot of training with college teams, and he said one time that if you say you're a leader by example and that's it, then you're a coward. Or his words, pretty strong words. Right? Leading by example is important, but if that's all you do and they don't change their behavior, then you're not leading. Leading is influence. It is making change in other people, right? So setting the example is hugely important, but that's not it. And so many people say, well, that's just not me. And I understand that. And I respect individual differences. But how within your personality can you also find other ways? Because it will help you and the team. Because just working hard, that's not enough.
Yeah, and I think that we can all fall prey to that mindset. Oh, that's just not me. But we'd be so pissed off at one of our athletes if that's what they said when we asked them to do something uncomfortable. Hey, how? I need you to change how you're playing right now to help our team. I need you to do XYZ. Now, coach, that's not me. Okay, Hal, well, there's the bench, right? At a lot of levels, like that's how, but as coaches, right, are we willing to step outside of our comfort zone? This really isn't my natural bent here to lead in this way or to do these things, but I'm going to try it because I think that I see the value and I know I need to do it. Um, I, I, I think there's tremendous power in that, of just being willing to stretch ourselves. And I think that kind of leads into one of the other topics that I wanted to talk about, and something obviously I know you're passionate about, as it's what you're doing now with your energy and time, is investing in coaches. But uh, talk to me about, yeah, the importance of us as leaders, want to be legacy leaders, being committed to lifelong learning and growth. And maybe even if you have examples of ways where you've, yeah, seen coaches do that effectively or model that effectively, your thoughts on that.
Right. So uh, it's funny because it almost sounds like a conflict to what I just said, but you do have to set the example, right? And again, being vulnerable and transparent, but talk about it. You know, um, you're going to a clinic, you read a book, you listen to a podcast, whatever it might be. But if you have to be careful because you don't ever want to come across as you have all the answers because none of us do, right? But that, you know what? I'm trying to get better for you. I want to do a better job for you. I've worked really hard at this and not lay the guilt trip on them of, well, hey, I read 3 books. How many shots have you taken? That's not really the way to do it, right? But it's just that they see you, they witness you. More is caught than is taught, right? So they see you getting better. They know what's going on, or if you can even share, hey, look, we're going to try this drill today. I picked up from, uh, another coach, and I want you to tell me if you like it. Now here they are. They have some choice. They have some autonomy. Their feedback. Oh, coach really wants to know what I think. Asking, this is one too, and you got to be careful about this. I found out, but asking them, hey, do you have a good drill? You have a good drill you did with your AU or your last coach or something. Now I found out that's got to be you got to talk to me before practice so we can talk through it thing. That can't be on the fly. Hey, let's try this kind of thing. But again, getting them to think, and even if it's the worst drill in the world, as long as it's unsafe, we're going to do it for a couple minutes if the kid's bold enough and brave enough to bring it to me. But we have to find a way because sometimes they'll do bring things that are just not safe. Look, we just can't do that, and here's why. And well, I don't care that Military Joe said that's what he did when he was growing up. We're just not going to do that today. Um, but yeah, so lifelong learning. There's different ways to learn. So I look at it as a stair step. I talk about this all the time in class. Number one is you have to reflect personally. You have to really dig deep into who you are. Have you taken? There's all kinds of personality tests. There's ones that are specific to coaching. Have you gotten feedback from your players, from your parents, from other coaches and the staff? Every school is different in kind of the evaluations you get. You may have a great athletic director that gives you a detailed, evaluation, or maybe not. I would ask other coaches to come watch me, at different levels. I was always trying to get more information and then think about really, because sometimes it's easy to say, well, it's, that parent's nuts or that kid didn't work hard. But really, what do you have control over? And how can you create a better environment for that kid? Because it's so easy to point the finger. And after you get outside of your personal experience, the next step is what I call personal research. In fancier terms, they talk about, mediated and unmediated learning, formal and informal learning, listening to great podcasts like this, like things you do on your own, going to watch somebody else's practice, going to get a certification, going to a clinic. That's research you're doing, watching film on your own. And the next step is what I had neither the time nor the inclination when I was coaching before, but now I do is peer-reviewed research. That's where people like me study a topic, they write about it, and it could be like, for example, like when I was researching legacy leadership, I studied Division I college basketball coaches at public institutions was my group. And I got permission to use their names. I had some really great coaches like Tony Bennett, Kelly Harper, a lot of coaches that have done a lot of great things. And they allowed me to, watch their practices, watch their media, watch their games, interview them, look at their media guides, look at their website, see how everything fits together to create the legacy in their program, if they are. So there's an innumerable amount of topics that people have researched in very specific criteria. And it's not that those all apply to you, it's that you look at it and it makes you think again, oh, well, does that apply in my situation? Because my situation is probably different. I've coached in 9 different programs. Every single one was different. And most of them were different from year to year. So how does this apply? How can I adapt this versus blindly adopt it? So there's more information. So you want to climb those steps as high as you can, which is why I think the value, if you have the time, and if, for example, in the state of Georgia, it's not this way in every state, it varies, but in the state of Georgia, if you're a health or PE teacher and you get our master's degree in kinesiology, you're eligible for a pay raise. Right? So it's a 13-month program, 10 classes. It's really good. To me, you're throwing away money not to do it. Well, why do we have coaches from 30 states then if it's not just Georgia people? Why did I have a coach that had won 2 national championships, already had a master's degree in the program? And I said, why are you in here? He said, I'm just trying to get better. And I said, well, that's probably why you have 2 national championships. So if you're trying to get better, there are formal learning opportunities. You don't have to have letters after your name to learn or to be a scholar. But that is an opportunity that's out there. So whatever you do, just look for ways to grow.
Coaches, thanks for listening to this week's episode, and a huge thanks to Dr. Wilson for joining me. We'll be back next week with part 2 of this conversation. You can find links to connect with Dr. Wilson or learn more about the Georgia Southern program and the show details. And don't forget to check out the show details if you'd like to get access to the free podcast notes or learn more about how we serve coaches. Thanks for listening to the podcast. We'll see you next week.